Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another one of those we're going to call it in the ring editions of the Jim Cornette Experience. We are cult casting to all of you people who still bother to listen to me with all the other things that I do every week. I'm on the air more than fucking oxygen. And ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about a variety of subjects, including I just got my haircut. My upcoming live events, including C2E2, everything's not sold out. You can still meet me this weekend in Chicago. There are grown adults running the country of New Zealand. Meanwhile, we have a complete buffoon, and he's on Twitter. We're going to talk about the first time that I got booed by the wrestling fans, and we're going to talk about Bullet Bob Armstrong on the occasion of his retirement match he just had recently at the age of 79. And how his career has impacted mine. All that and more. And to join me, I got to take a big breath for this one. Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard podcast network, Mr. Co-host to you. He's the post office playboy, Swammy's pappy, the proprietor of the French Toast Chateau, and the junior assistant vice president of the Bullet Bob Armstrong fan club, your friend and mine, the great Brian Last.
Aloha, Jim. What a pleasure it is to be here once again. And I did not even get Bullet Bob to sign my permission slip to get me this illustrious position in the fan club.
Do you know I never got one of those either?
Get out of here. That was the prerequisite to get in any of the magazines.
But I was grandfathered in, and we'll talk about that very shortly. But anyway, I got to vent for a second here. And you know, I'm trying to get ready to go see the fine folks in Chicagoland this weekend at the big C2E2, and Have a Beef is sold out, but you can still see me at my booth all 3 days. So come one, come all. And I'm bringing a ton of stuff with me. But I want to be all groomed properly and spruced up and everything to meet the folks. So I want to get my hair cut. So I go over to the place. I'm not going to mention any brand names, but the place I get my hair cut over here very near my home. And it's 9 o'clock in the morning. They've just opened. They've opened like 5 minutes earlier, right? So I figure I'll slip in here and there'll be no wait. And I slip in, and sure enough, there's two hair cutters. What do they call them? They don't style me.
I don't know. What do they call them at Supercuts?
It's actually not Supercuts. See, so you've taken a. But see, if that had been right, it would have been so great for you, but it wasn't. Anyway, so I go in, and there's two hair cutters, and there's one person in a chair, and there's one hair cutter free, and I give my name, and I go there all the time, so I'm in the system. They've got their eye on me, and she said it'll be about 30 minutes. I said, oh. Did you check in online? No. You know, every time I come in there, I say the same thing. No, I didn't check in online. No, I don't know how to use their app or anybody else's app. I don't have a smartphone. I don't check in online. I walk in person and present myself with my money in hand, like customers have when they've done business transactions at establishments doing business for the past, hundreds and thousands of years since the idea of compensation for goods and services began. I'm here, and I got money. But these assholes that get on their fucking phone and check in. So immediately somebody walks in right behind me, boom, and there's 2 or 3 more that come in. And I got to sit there 30 minutes. When I made the effort to go in there in person and conduct a transaction, just like when I go to Kroger, I'll mention their name because I'm not happy with them. When I go to Kroger, I like shopping at my neighborhood Kroger. The meat counter guy, he's a good guy. He slips me a little extra every now and then, a little extra meat. And then the seafood guy, he's a little fishy, though. But nevertheless, I like doing my shopping when I'm on my... Oh, shut up. When I'm on my diet and I want my healthy food, I go in there and I pick my things. I like to look at my things. It's fucking online shopping. Well, sure, they'll bring it to you, but you got to fucking go through the goddamn thing and figure out, what every single thing you wanted. What if I see a tremendous manager special on quality meat that's right there in the discount bin? I will buy some discount meat if it looks and passes the smell test. But anyway, I like to go in. I like to have my shit in my hand, pick my own stuff that I'm going to consume, pay for it with a human being, and go about my business. But no, they eliminated the under 15 and under item lanes to put in more U-scans. And then they eliminated some of their human beings that check groceries out since the fucking grocery was invented by Sam Drucker in 1842. And they've replaced that with more U-scan lanes. And now they've got a deal. If you want, you could, I don't know how it works, but I saw it. I was staring at it. I didn't know what I was looking at, but there's a bunch of these handheld fucking things that you can scan your barcode of your item and fucking do something or other and just whiz away. That's a way for me to go to the penitentiary. There's no human beings anymore, goddamn transacting business. And I'm pissed off. When you order from Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com, ladies and gentlemen, you're dealing with me for the good and bad. But your order has been taken. It has been perused, packed, sealed, signed, and delivered to the post office to Susie, who, by the way, is upset that you have not been calling her.
Oh, give me a break.
It's personally. Because if I'm taking somebody's money, I'm providing the service for them personally. And it's fucking over mechanization of the goddamn world. If they were going to give me money, I'd go in there, I'd work to learn how to use all this shit. But it's not working. I'm giving them money. They need to fucking service me. Every once in a while, you'd like to be serviced, wouldn't you?
Every now and then, especially when I go to Sport Clips, I want to be serviced right away.
That's not it either.
God damn it. By the way, I love how, to go to something I said, I think last week on The Experience, I love how this story about your haircut devolved into another story involving meat on the show.
Well, there's always some meat around. You need your protein. And as a matter of fact, since we're on the subject of meat and protrusions, whatever the fuck we were on, once again, somebody, I won't mention any names here, but on the fine program that we do here, and people still listen to me. I don't know why. I mean, you're a fairly normal person. And so, but I think, is it just because they want to see if I'll have this is when I finally have the big nervous breakdown and they hear the fucking crashing and banging everywhere, because the numbers are better than ever. More people are listening to the program. I still can't believe they actually listen to this conversation that we have every week, but they do. And because of that, people are trying to hop on the bandwagon and advertise their goods and services on our program. And one of them is, I'm not going to mention any brand names or anything, but we keep getting harassed to advertise, how can we politely put it, dick pills. Where and there's nothing the matter with dick pills, and I'm not advocating not using dick pills, especially when necessary, or even just for fun. But I don't feel the need to promote them to our audience, like that. Our audience it consists of a high number of people that have problems in that particular area, and I don't know why. Because the cult of Cornette is strong, by God, and virile. And masculine, except for the feminine ones. And they're even virile and strong. They're just not masculine.
That's right. Plus, we're just not that desperate for money yet.
Plus, it just seems like, I swear to God, I didn't even think about this until now, but I had to go back and renegotiate our deal for Ohio Valley Wrestling with the local affiliate here, the WB affiliate at the time that was a network. We had a deal where we paid partial compensation. We gave them a payment and commercial time, which we shouldn't have been giving them the payment because we were the highest rated television program that they aired on Saturdays, but we won't fight that battle again. But anyway, and they got 4 minutes of commercial time and we got 6 minutes or whatever. And we paid, it was in the hundreds of dollars a week. So we're not talking about a massive amount, but I turn on my television show one night and there is 1-900, like, suck my rod. I mean, and I'm not even being homophobic here. It was a bunch of half naked guys that, which my program consisted of a bunch of half naked guys. And then there's a bunch of half naked guys talking to each other on 1-900, fucking meat. I don't, what it is, the gay sex line, not even.
It's always meat.
And And it wasn't even like, hey, here's a dating place where gay people can meet. It was no, this is an actual sex porn line. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I called my sales rep and I said, why are we advertising the gay porn on my program? I'm not sure that it's the right, we have children. We're promoting Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom events. Bring the kiddies. And then we go to break and there's fucking Rod Steele and his fucking, and Jack Ramrod, So anyway, I actually had a wrestler named Rod Steele one time. He's dead now. And it wasn't because of dick pills, but anyway, he said, well, they bought an ROS schedule run of station. The computer plugs it in between 11 p.m. and 7. I said, how about this? I gave him like $300 more a week and just bought the whole fucking hour. And then we had all of our commercial inventory. And I just ran a couple of my spots twice and used some more of my sponsors to make them feel good rather than the fucking Ramrod line making everybody feel good. So no, we're not there yet where we think that the cult is going to be highly benefited by these products.
Yeah. So stop asking.
Well, they're very persistent. I think I saw a commercial where if they keep asking longer than 4 hours to sponsor us, that they should see a doctor.
Well, then they should see a doctor immediately.
Anyway, I mentioned C2E2 this weekend for the folks around Chicagoland that are flocking to there's going to be a bunch of folks. They're saying 100,000 people. I don't know. This is a figure I've heard bandied around. But also my live event schedule is going to be busy over the next several months. But then I'm tapering off at the end of the year because I'm already pretty much full, folks. So if you want to see me in person between now and, say, September, when I'm going to go start hiding in the castle again this year, please do at C2E2, then at the MLW TV tapings in New York City. I've got special travel arrangements. I'm going to be ferried around by armored car up there. It's part of the deal with MLW. But April 4th and April 5th at the Melrose Ballroom in Long Island City, I'll be there for the MLW TV tapings and the live Battle Riot special for BN Sports. And I was off of Twitter. I've told everybody last week for 3 or 4 days trying to rest my brain, right? And so I didn't give it any traction because do you remember the guy that hit Eddie Edwards in the face with a baseball bat and pretty much caved his fucking eyeball in and almost killed him?
Oh, yeah, that was a while ago, right?
Well, that was a while ago, but apparently nobody's run this fucking Sami Callihan out of the wrestling business yet because he tweeted that imagine this. Jim Cornette and Sami Callihan are going to be in the same building at the same time. Wonder what might happen, trying to leech off my Twitter followers, right? And I didn't hear about it till afterwards because I was off the Twitter at that point, but I haven't mentioned it otherwise, and I will mention it now to say that I'm sure that we've been in the same building at the same place because I'm sure that being as he's a big mark, he's probably bought a lot of tickets to see me. But as far as whether he's going to have a baseball bat or a golf club, I'll have a tennis racket because BN Sports made me my own custom-made tennis racket to welcome me to MLW Fusion as the color commentator. And I'm going to have that racket in New York. And I'm not going to hit Sami Callihan with it because I don't want to damage the racket because it's custom-made and it was by the network. But I just want to – I'll have it there to illustrate to Sami Callihan that if he's an unprofessional, dangerous, outlaw mud show wrestler, in my opinion, because he caved a friend of mine's face in with a baseball bat. If he can impress me with his wrestling in my job as color commentator, then I will certainly call his good wrestling. But I will also continue to tell everybody that I think he's reckless and he's one of these guys that likes to do all this hardcore, dangerous shit to go viral and to get over. And he doesn't care whether he breaks his own neck, which I don't either. But I do care if he breaks somebody else's neck at a company that I'm just starting to be involved in. So hopefully they can snatch a knot in his tail. But I'm going to have that tennis racket there, the BN Sports tennis racket, just to illustrate to Sami Callihan that if he feels froggy about what I've said, then he can feel free to say anything to me that he wants to say. It's a free country, almost. who's president. But if he wants to be physical, the one thing that's going to prevent him from doing that, so all of those deathmatch goofball fans can't get their jollies off him slapping the taste out of my mouth, slapping me naked and stealing my clothes, as they say, because the one thing that he's addicted to is not drugs, not alcohol, it's attention. He's an attention whore. And the network just happens to like me a little better than they probably like Mr. Sami Callihan. So if he wants to come and slap me while I'm holding that BN Sports tennis racket that the representative of the network custom made, his name is James, by the way, a good choice by his parents, had custom made and presented to me, and then promptly get his television fucking platform, old Mr. Callahan's television platform, jerked out from under him and kicked off television, and he can go ahead, and then I'll sue him. So I don't know whether he can wrestle or not, because the only thing I've ever seen of him is caving my friend's face in with a baseball bat.
No, that wasn't the only thing. You also saw when he injured Kevin Sullivan.
Oh, my God, no. I saw the picture of Kevin afterward. I didn't see the actual happening, I don't think. But regardless, well, there you go. Two friends of mine. So if Sami Callihan wants to attempt to have a good match in New York City, I'll be more than happy to call it. I'll also be more than happy to call it if he falls on his ass. And we'll see what happens. One of those shows is live, folks. Also, in Madison, West Virginia, right outside of Charleston, right down the road from a Quaker Steak and Lube, All-Star Wrestling is going to induct myself, Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane, and Dennis Condrey, the Midnight Express, in the All-Star Wrestling Hall of Fame on Saturday, April 13th. Also, Stephen P. New is going to be there to present a proclamation of recognition and gratitude to Smoky Mountain Legends Bobby Fulton and Tracy Smothers and Brian Logan, the referee of that Legends match, on their contributions to wrestling on behalf of the fans of West Virginia. That's going to be a great night, April 13th. Then, April 27th, Charlotte, the Crockett Cup. Not only do you see the live event, which I will be doing color for along with Joe Galley, but also the Legends VIP meet and greet earlier in the day. Not only myself and the Midnight Express, but also the Rock and Roll Express, Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA. Not only all those great stars in Charlotte, Brian, but also I have gotten wind that the incomparable Tommy Young may show up that day and possibly even meet people. We're still determining that, right? Thompson is doing great, and I believe he will be there that day as well. And folks, if this is going too fast for you, JimCornette.com, click on events and appearances, because I just updated everything. Richmond, Virginia, May the 18th. Don't forget the TMPT Con 3 with myself and all three members of the Midnight Express, but also I'm doing a VIP event after the convention that day where we're going to hang out and have pizza and tell stories and do all kinds of bullshit. And then this summer, Milwaukee, get ready. Actually, Waukesha. I will be in Milwaukee, Waukesha, for MLW on Saturday, June the 1st. And then we're coming back to Chicago to Cicero, Illinois on July the 6th for MLW. Knoxville, Tennessee, the Fanboy Expo, July 12th, 13th, and 14th. The Midnight Express will be there on the 13th only. Good Lord, I'm not finished yet, because it's The Gathering in Charlotte, North Carolina, Thursday, August 15th to Sunday, August 18th. And all the links for all the tickets are on JimCornette.com. I've finally got all that out.
Is Chicago the city that you're going to be in the most this year besides Louisville?
Apparently, yes. They can't get enough of me there. And MLW is sold out. Have a Beef is sold out. C2E2 is not sold out. The next MLW will sell out. Get your tickets early, folks. We're expecting an all-time record-breaking crowd. But anyway, and after August, as it looks, I'm saying adieu early, kids. I think I'm going in the house in September this year because this is a busy season. So get them while they're hot and see me while you can. Just real quick, I was going to go off on a major goddamn tangent, but I don't want to ruin my mood. But it'll probably happen anyway. Adults are running the country of New Zealand. I haven't even had time over the last several days to read up on everything, see exactly what they're doing. But basically, they had a big fucking shooting. Another one of these nuts that loves Trump And if Trump ain't for all these fuckers, he's not doing a good enough job of telling them that he's not. Because they seem to be enamored of him and think that he's just fine with what they're doing. But another one of these fucking nuts shoots, 49, kills 49 people and shoots another 50 or whatever the fuck. With one of the, and forgive me, you fucking dickless, goddamn ballless, gutless fucking gun fetishists and ammo sexuals, if I don't have the exact terminology correct, but is it a semi-assault rifle or a semi-automatic or assault rifle? The point is, anybody that knows, besides somebody in the Army, what the exact name for these is, that's the first person you look at to take away from them, because they're too fucking fixated on this shit. He takes one of these fucking assault rifles and shoots, kills a bunch of people, and the next day, what happens? Is it president, prime minister, the prime minister? It's a lady. Imagine that, a level-headed woman, which may be what we fucking need to fix all this shit. Comes out the next day and says, okay, boom, nope, no more of this shit. We're not going to sell any more of those. Attorney General, change the law. Like a normal, sane, responsible, intelligent, adult, supposed leader of a country would do. Hey, kids, that's why we can't have nice things, because you can't take care of them. People don't need to have these kind of guns. They don't need to be sold. So we are not going to do it. And I haven't looked up to see if this is retroactive, if they're also telling everybody else turn their shit in, but I did get tweeted from one guy that he showed his form. He's lives in New Zealand. And he's had guns, and it's a rural area in some parts of it, I believe. But he's had a gun or whatever the fuck for so long, one of these guns. And he says, but how did he word it? Basically, my choice to own this is not more important than the public safety and good. So I am voluntarily turning it in. There's his form. He turned this in to be destroyed. Like adults. But the response on Twitter from these fucking, and I block as many as I can, because once again, if you're that fucking stupid, I don't want you to be entertained by my goddamn tweets. But the gun nuts, the Constitution nuts, the Second Amendment nuts, the nuts, period. I've said this before, I will say it again. The people with the most guns are the first people that you should look at to start taking them away. Because nobody needs this shit or that much shit. They're just engage with reality for any period of fucking time. First of all, they are not God-given rights. God didn't sign the Constitution. Besides that, God is a fictional creature created by man. The Constitution is a document created by man in a different time. It needs to be changed in a number of ways. This most specifically, it already has been changed. How many amendments are there now? What is there? 33, 4, 2? Somewhere in there. About almost 3 dozen times they've said, oh, we left something out, or no, shit, we changed. Oh, we forgot. We got to put this in. But for whatever reason, the Second Amendment, no, it's fine. Leave it just, even though it doesn't say anything and actually doesn't support these fucking gun fetishist arguments in the least. But it needs to be changed. It's not we have to write a whole new Constitution from scratch, folks. And of course, the patriotic Americans, once again, are the most patriotic, are the ones you need to keep an eye on, apparently, from Twitter. Because they're the ones that want to fight the government. The most patriotic Americans are stockpiling weapons in case the government gets tyrannical so that they can fight them. That's what I'm getting from Twitter. From Jimmy Bob and Billy Joe and fucking Cletus down at the gas station. Overlooking the fact that the government would fucking press a button and fucking just blow up Billy Bob's fucking filling station from Washington without even leaving the goddamn house. You fucking morons. So, the most patriotic Americans are the ones that are stockpiling weapons and will not have their rights infringed on so that they can one day fight back against the government of the country that they love so much in case it gets tyrannical. But the closest we've ever come is the motherfucker there now that they support. You fucking fuck-knuckle cock-womble twit shits. I just made that shit up on the fly.
That was impressive.
So these people need mental help. We need to have a field service unit that goes out and spreads out amongst the towns and the communities to find these people and fucking help them. So they don't want their rights infringed on, despite the fact that everybody else's children are getting mowed down in kindergarten. People are getting shot in church or synagogues or whatever. They're getting mowed down at public gatherings and concerts by people who support their fucking president and all of their rights to have the fucking guns. Or by the nutcase fucking lunatic, psychopathic fucking loner in high school that just brings guns from home because his parents are fucking nuts. Was it Australia or was it Scotland? That it was Australia that had the mass shooting and then did the government buyback program, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because they said, well, if criminals don't obey laws, so only the criminals will have guns. In your simple-minded world where you were born downstream from the nuclear plant and your mother drank fucking radioactive waste, which led to the chromosomes in your brain being fucking stupid, if there are not guns to be had, if they are as hard as possible to get, then the criminals will have a hard time too. And that's the idea. The Chicago gun laws don't work because of the massive overland trek all the way to fucking Hammond, Indiana, 13 miles away, where you can get anything you want on the street corner. There has to be a fucking federal, here's a national emergency, right? This is the perfect way to use the president's power for a national emergency if we had a sane adult president. And we will have soon. So thanks, Trump, you fucking pig fucker. Declare your national emergency for your fake fucking wall so you can keep the rubes and the suckers that elected you placated, despite the fact that there's no emergency and you're taking money away that not only did the government not give you, the taxpayers didn't want you to have, and is not necessary and is needed for other things, but you've set a precedent. So now the next time we get a grown adult Democrat, then they can declare a national emergency on guns. And anybody, any private citizen that wants to have, own, possess an automatic weapon, semi-automatic weapon, assault rifle, whatever the fuck, needs to be fucking evaluated, checked out, and kept an eye on. Because why would you? It's fucking stupid. And past that, fucking make a goddamn law. Okay, you got a handgun and fire 6 shots, whatever, you got the 22 rifle. There's got to be some cutoff point where people are not allowed to have this shit. There is already. We've established Howie, the mailroom guy, can't go down to the goddamn Walmart and buy a case hand grenades just in case he's got moles in his front yard. So if you can't have hand grenades, then why does the line need to be there? Anything you shouldn't have in your home or on your person at some point to protect yourself in a legitimately reasonable atmosphere. Woman late at night has to go to and from work, maybe wants to have a little fucking pistol in her purse. Whatever the fuck. Past that, we know who you are. Many of you are licensed. We're going to buy them all back, turn them in, or we're going to fuck with you heavily. Anybody who has one that ain't licensed, when we find it, we're going to fuck with you even more heavily. Sooner or later, in about 50 years, you would round up enough that the rest of society from then on, if we haven't all melted because the Republicans don't believe in science either, they just believe in fucking God-given rights from a God that doesn't exist on a document written 250 years ago with a feather pulled out of a chicken's ass. But if we haven't all melted in 50 years or so, then maybe there would be a shortage of guns because people wouldn't just be allowed to have as many as they wanted or whatever kind they wanted. So they could fucking shoot people. That would be an idea. New Zealand's on the right track. Australia's on the right track. Every developed country in the world is on the right track. We think we need more guns to protect us from the people with the guns that they already shouldn't have. Because of Republicans and fucking patriots who are equally fucking stupid. If you don't want people to call you stupid, kids, don't do stupid shit. Fuck. And then this fucking moron, the tweets over the weekend, right? He slanders John McCain because he believes a conspiracy theory that true and fucking slandered John McCain. He's hot at Saturday Night Live. I think he's going to put somebody from Saturday Night Live in prison.
And that was a rerun.
And it was a rerun. There was the other thing. He's melted fucking down. And once again, if you're a conservative, not politician, but a conservative voter, or you're conservative minded, that's your ideology. Well, you're weird. But if that's the way you think, whatever the fuck. But if you can't, by this point, come out and just fucking point and just say, okay, no, all right, he's fucking not right. He's 70-something years old. The pressure's getting to him. He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. He's melting down. He's going to have a fucking stroke. Whatever the fuck. He's not right in the head. Then fuck you. And that's why I fuck all these Republican politicians that are going to get, and we're going to get rid of Mitch McConnell this fucking year. That no good piece of shit that's hurt more people over the years than probably anybody else because he's been here so long. But that all of them are not just stepping back and saying, okay, folks, we're sorry. We recognize the situation now. We're having him taken to a fucking room, and we're going to keep an eye on him for the next year and a half. We're going to get another candidate that knows how this shit works and can do what our voters want, but not be a fucking lunatic and a piece of shit criminal and a goddamn buffoon. And we're going to run him against the Democrats, and then we'll keep an eye on Trump in the meantime that he didn't fuck anything else up. If that they haven't done that, they're fucking the ones that are committing treason. They're the fucking traitors, and they ought to be put in fucking jail for it. Aiding and abetting the enemy. In this case, a fucking guy who's a bitch for the fucking Russian fucking premier that wants to fucking take us down. And he's a goddamn, he's a cock holster for Vladimir Putin. He's an asshole. He's a liar. He's an idiot that doesn't know that he doesn't know what the fuck he doesn't know, which is the most dangerous kind. And he's an embarrassment. So fuck all of them.
I like him making fun of John McCain, saying he was last in the class in Annapolis, and previously with Obama, saying, why don't we see his records? And now we find out that Michael Cohen did everything he could to make sure we never see Donald Trump's school records,
yes,
his SAT scores, and just how great he did in Wharton, even though, more than likely his dad just paid for him to get a degree and he just putzed around.
Well, which we've found out that's been going on for a while. So I told you I was going to stay in a good mood. But it's amazing to me that, once again, the supposed patriots around here, another country has a problem and handles it in a quick and efficient and correct way, and people cheer the announcement because they're sane and they didn't grow up watching cowboy movies and all think they're going to be Bruce Willis or Schwarzenegger or somehow save the world or fight off the evil government like in the movies. You delusional fucking twats, country fucking bumpkins. Try not to get mad. But another country handles it in a proper way with a grown adult leader, and then we get this fucking guy who inspires most of this shit to begin with, tweeting like a goddamn fucking the old man next door out in his bathrobe, having a series of small strokes while he fucking pisses in the goddamn gardenias. So yes, America is a great country. The greatest in the world? Apparently not. And certainly, for the next year and a half at least, we will be ashamed to show our faces to the rest of the world because of what we've got in the White House that was elected as a publicity stunt and due to the ratio of people who will buy fucking bullshit, such as the Christians, the evangelicals, and fucking rednecks, and the gun nuts, and the hashtag 2A, hashtag fuck you. Are you doing anything on your programs this week that can cheer me up?
We have another fun week on the Arcadian Vanguard podcast network this week. Hey, this week on Breaking Kayfabe with Baldwin and Barry, the boys sit down and talk with Hacksaw Butch Reed. You can hear that at BaldwinPod.com. This week on Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam and Sean Goodwin, Scott Cornish, the popular wrestling humorist, joins the show to discuss 1981 WWF. You can get that at McAdamPod.com. On Kentucky Fried Wrestling, Howard Baum joins the show to discuss with Scott Bowden the career of Joe LeDuc in Memphis at KFRPod.com. And don't forget Ron Fuller's Studcast, especially the Super Studcast, the latest edition, part 1 of Ron's look at his 10 most memorable matches. Hear him go in depth about working with Bob Armstrong, working with his dad, and so many others. You can get that show for patrons of the Studcast at patreon.com/Studcast for only $2.99 a month. Check it out. I think you will definitely like that, as well as the other content we have up on there. I also want to mention, this week on the Mid-South Wrestling Television Review, we cover the big Ted DiBiase heel turn of 1982 at midsouthpod.com. And of course, the 605 Superpodcast, the Mothership. See, I didn't do a hard one because I wanted to put you in a good mood, not a bad mood.
My blood pressure. You know, they had to take Ted DiBiase out of the downtown municipal auditorium in the trunk of Grizzly Smith's car when he turned heel on Dog in Louisiana.
No, that was probably when he cost him, because he turned heel on him at the TV taping.
Well, okay, but yeah, when he cost, whatever, when he had done the angle where he turned heel on Dog, and they did something that night, and the people were waiting out in the parking lot, and this was a place where they had you've seen on Cops, when they do Mardi Gras, the cops on horseback, right? They have the cops on horseback in downtown New Orleans, and they when the Dog was really hot and they were selling out and turning people away from that building, they'd have the cops keeping the people back from trying to riot and get in. Well, the cops can't even get the goddamn people to fucking clear out. They're waiting in the back, whatever the fuck. Everybody loved Grizzly Smith. He'd been there for 20 years. Everybody knew him. He was not only Watts' agent, but he was on television as a official with the promotion, and he's a huge babyface. So they just figured out a way to get Grizzly's fucking car in the back. They threw DiBiase in the trunk, and then Grizzly just drove out, smiling at the fans. Hey, oh, it's a beloved Grizzly Smith. Let him pass. And then I think he kept Teddy in the trunk about 5 more miles just to worry him a little bit.
Well, it is something. You know, it's one thing for a guy to come into a territory and be a top heel. It's another thing for the area fans to grow up with someone, to see them as a rookie, to grow with them, to see their victories, to always see them as one guy, that babyface, and all of a sudden, quickly, he turns and he just becomes a real shitheel overnight. And boy, did they react to it with DiBiase.
They certainly did.
Once again, the 605 Super Podcast I was mentioning before, the Mothership.
Yeah, all right.
This week we have a packed show. The Golden Boy, Jerry Gray, returns to the show to discuss various wrestling topics. We also have Mike O'Gorman, who was last heard on the show as Andre the Giant in a very memorable appearance as part of Pandemonium Theater. He's going to join the show to talk about the origin of his amazing Andre the Giant impression. Check that out. We also have the return of the Top 10 and recently unearthed classic audio from 1964 in Los Angeles featuring The Destroyer, Dick the Bruiser, The Ripper, who by the way was Rip Hawk, Regis Philbin, and so much more. Plus, my conversation with Les Thatcher touching on a number of issues. We're going to talk about Knoxville. We're going to talk about the Knoxville War, the Georgia War, so much, and the Wrestling Cousins. Of course, Les was part of a tag team, the Wrestling Cousins. That was Les Thatcher, Roger Kirby, and Dennis Hall. Did you ever see them, Jim?
I didn't. Well, not as I saw all 3 of them individually, but not as the team of the Cousins. Yes.
We'll hear more about that and so much more on the 605 Super Podcast. And we're going to announce this week's co-host on the Facebook page this Friday. Facebook.com/Superpodcast. But listen to this week's show and every episode at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts. The Mothership.
The Mothership. The Nature Boy. And that actually... no, the Nature Boy, Roger Kirby. You talked about the wrestling cousins because Roger Kirby just passed away. And actually, he was a tremendous worker. I always saw him as a heel. I'm sure he was a good babyface too, but he took great backdrops, nice bumps, but he had the body. And he, we talked about on a recent drive-through the difference in when Buddy Landell took the Nature Boy versus when Ric Flair took the Nature Boy gimmick and the different ways that it came about and that they went about it. But Kirby in his younger days had the dashing mustache and the blonde hair, and he kind of favored, as they used to say back in the South, Buddy Rogers physically. He was about the same height. He had that big barrel chest. Yeah. He looked real good, had a tan. So that, he kind of he didn't really work the Nature Boy gimmick like, woo, I'm styling and profiling, partying all night with like Flair did, but he carried it off as far as appearance, and he was an excellent worker. I think Harley Race said one time something to the effect of, Kirby was as good as he was. He just got the breaks. So he was a real talented wrestler.
We talked about the Nature Boys, and we talked about several of them. We didn't mention Nature Boy Paul Lee, unfortunately, but we also didn't mention maybe the worst of the Nature Boys, Nature Boy Stanley Lane.
Oh, God. Well, that came about because, and first of all, Stan hates the name Stanley. He hates that. Hates people to call it. It is not his name, and he hates people to call him that. But when he first went to Florida, he had just really finished being trained by Ric Flair. Because as we've told the story before, Stan was working room service at the Hilton at Myrtle Beach. And one morning about 10 o'clock, there comes an order from this room for like 6 Bloody Marys. And so Stan takes it, and it's Flair. And Stan looked, he was in great shape and looked good even then. And he was already like 24, 25. And so Flair had, I think, $100 bill, and Stan didn't have any change. And Flair said, here, just see me at the pool or on the beach or whatever. Stan takes him his change later on. And Flair asked him, hey, have you ever thought of being a wrestler? So Stan, for a while, would go back and forth from Greensboro to Charlotte to train in Flair's backyard, him and Steve Muslim, who became Steve Travis. And they'd run around Flair's neighborhood, do their road work and work out in Flair's gym. And he showed him the basic stuff. And then they sent him out to Amarillo, Stan. And he was out there for about 3 months until they wanted to do an angle where Mulligan and Murdoch were running the territory at the time. And they wanted to do an angle where they threw a fireball on Stan. He's like, fuck, I'm out here in the middle of West Texas. I'm not making any money. Now they will set me on fire. Right. So he got booked in Florida. And that's where he'd had 3 or 4 months of experience at that point. So that's where when he came in with the way he looked, and because he had been trained by Flair, they just made Nature Boy, and they made it Stanley in the ads, and he fucking hated it. And he used that about, I guess, what was he in Florida at that point? 3, 4, 5, 6 months, something like that.
Yeah.
And the best part was apparently him and Brian St. John, who had not been wrestling very long either, they brought them in and put them together as a heel team. And guess who dropped the Florida Tag Team Championship to Stan Lane, who'd been in the business like 4 months, and Brian St. John?
79. Was it? Would it have been Eddie Graham in his last?
And guess who his partner was?
I don't think it would have been Mike there.
Ray Stevens.
Wow.
The Stan said, I beat Eddie Graham and Ray Stevens. I've been in the business 4 months. I won a title from anyway. So that was how did we get started there? Stanley Lane, the Nature Boy.
The Nature Boy.
Well, there you have it. Is that all you got?
That's seemingly.
I have an email here I'd like to read. It was basically the one-line question. Dear Jim, this is from Paul. Dear Jim, do you remember what it was like the first time you actually got booed by the fans? And yes, I do. It was about 3 years before I got into business.
What did you do?
No, this made me remember this. It's a cute story because it shows how seriously that the people used to take the business, the fans. I'm the photographer in Louisville at the Gardens, and I've been doing this. Everybody knows me, right? I have no heat per se, except for the old man that used to complain when I kneel down in front of him. He's like, "Hey, boy, picture boy, move over. I can't see." Well, fuck you. I'm working here. But Lawler had just turned heel in the fall of 79. And boy, me and Bolin were both farting through silk now because Lawler's doing all this heel shit and these promos are great. He's got Jimmy Hart. He's brought him in as his manager. I'm thinking this is going to be, I don't care if it does business. This is going to be the most entertaining run we've ever seen. And Lawler breaks his leg like fucking 3 months later. Anyway, Lawler, he's got the CWA title and he's just turned heel and he's working with Bobo Brazil, who's obviously a wrestling legend. At this point in 1979, he was, on the tail end of his career. He'd been in business 30 years. As a matter of fact, that was the same summer he worked here. One night, a couple of the ushers, he's standing there. And remember that bolero sparkly vested style thing that he used to wear in the high-waisted trunks and the boots? They were all color coordinated.
Yeah.
He always looked good, and he had his hair done and everything. And he's 6'6", and he's like 300 pounds. He just doesn't look like anybody else, Bobo Brazil. Whether he was taking any big bumps at that point in his career or not, he still looked impressive. And two of the ushers from the Gardens back there watching the back door, and you hear one of them because the sound echoes through that back area. One guy said, "Who's that guy?" And the other one said, "You don't know him? Well, that's Bozo Brazier." And Bobo Lee standing waiting to go out, and I was just taking a couple pictures of him, and he heard that, and he looked over at him sideways, and he had that voice that was so deep, and he just went, 30 years in the business, and it's Bozo Brazier. But anyway, so Lawler's working with Bobo Brazil, right? And Lawler just switched heel, and he's doing all the tricks to get that. And he could get heat. I mean, he had just been the biggest babyface in the territory 2 months previous, but now the people are ready to kill him. This is the same period. Jimmy Hart actually had fans jumping in the ring and hopping on him in Louisville the first 2 months that he was in the business, and when he'd never even spoken on promos, just because what Lawler had him do in the matches and in the finishes. He had fans hitting the ring on him. So anyway, he was a master. Lawler sees me taking pictures. He's just it's during the heat. He's giving Bobo the big elbow. Boom. Bobo falls down like the big tree bump that he used to take. Timber, boom, and kind of rolls over on his face. And Lawler sees me. And he kneels down on Bobo's back and hits a fucking single bicep pose and a big grin for the camera. And I'm like, oh, shit, what a great shot. And I take the picture, right? When I do, the people started booing me. Because now, bear this in mind, it's in the Louisville Gardens. There's no thought that Lawler's just working for the people. Me and him are 10 feet apart. I'm right at the ring apron. He kneels down and he gives me the big grin, and they see the flash go off underneath those old time ring lights. And they start booing, "Don't take that picture. Fuck you." What the fuck? And I mean, I think some kid even threw like a handful of popcorn at me or whatever. And it got a round of boos and actually Lawler was such a master of that. He had the people in his hand all the time. Not only did it get heat on him for being a prick, but it actually made the people mad at me for taking the picture. They don't take the business that seriously anymore.
Did you think Lawler was stale before the turn in 79?
Probably, but part of that was because of 79 started off okay with Lawler and Austin Idol, but then once again, as we've talked about from all sides of this fence, the Knoxville crew coming in, and Robert Bookin was not a land office business at the box office, and also, led to them having to all go back when the guys left in Southeastern and Knoxville, and Jarrett having to replenish the roster. But that's when he did the Tupelo concession stand brawl, and that's when he finally pulled the trigger to bring Jackie Fargo back, and then Jackie and Roughhouse back. And so that summer, business was tremendous, especially in Memphis, with the Blonde Bombers and Lawler and Dundee and Fargo and that whole 9 yards. And the matches were pretty good also because that's when the Freebirds came in. But after that, at that point, that's also the year Lawler had gotten the perm. And it ruined his hair for a while too. It really did. But I think the time was right because they could pull the trigger on him and Dundee again. It had been 2 years, and they ended up doing some pretty decent business. Especially Louisville was real consistent at the end of '79 until Lawler broke his leg, and then a lot of things fell to shit for the next year. But it led to the best year they ever had business wise to that point. So when he came back, how can we miss you if you don't go away?
Plus, if you look at Jimmy Hart before Lawler got hurt and then after, we would have probably never gotten Jimmy Hart the way we got him if Lawler never broke his leg.
Yeah, he would have never have needed to do all those promos and to find out that, he could do all that shit because Lawler's manager was always the stooge. Other guys got managers because they couldn't talk. Lawler, Sam Bass barely spoke. Mickey Poole, who was at least challenged in some respect, intellectually, and to put it nicely, had heat because Lawler's manager was always the stooge. He's the guy that hands in the object or hands in the cowboy boot or distracts the referee or says, you tell him, King, or helps get heat in the finish. So it's a 2-on-1 situation. Lawler ran the whole show. He did all the promos. He called all the matches. He told everybody, including the referee, what to do in all of his matches because he was a guy. He was the best live action wrestling director, if that was ever a term, that in the business. Even Bockwinkel said one time, Lawler's the best ring general he'd ever been in the ring with. That feeling what people want and just doing shit instead of planning it and just doing shit on sperm of the moment. So the manager role there was one of his. It was like throwing fire or using a chain. It was one of his gimmicks. The manager was never supposed to have any real, attention. So it was a different synergy. And there you have it.
A synergy Lawler seemed to repeat it in real life with some of the people that he's had around as stooges, I think.
Well, the Three Stooges could have been shot in Memphis on location at any point. Anyway, it was, and we talked earlier about Bullet Bob and fan clubs and things of that. Bullet Bob Armstrong just had his retirement match in Pensacola. It was just on the internet. He's 79 this year. And I mean, I've seen pictures and I didn't see any video of this or any pictures or whatever, but Bob, even a few years ago, still had arms. That was his nickname, Arms, because his fucking arms and his chest and just, Bob just always looked good, looked cool. But I thought it would be a time to talk about, since he just had his last match or his retirement match. And these are always, 79. He's got to do it when he's 80 also, just to say he fucking did. And then that would, wait a minute, 2020, start at 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, O's, teens. 2020 would get him 7 decades. Because if he'd have started 1 year earlier, he could get 8 decades. That'd be past theirs. Anyway, he has had a tremendous impact on my life and my career in general. And we've got so many new listeners. We've told the story many times before, but for those of you who haven't heard it, the first writing that I did in professional wrestling was because I was president of Bob Armstrong's fan club and did the bulletins, Bob's Brigade. And you know how this came to be. Or maybe you don't, because you mentioned the permission slip. You know how I got that spot, don't you?
No.
And Mike Gibson, by the way, is a listener. I've been tweeting back and forth some with him. He emailed me not long ago. Mike Gibson was the original president of the Bob Armstrong fan club. He's the one that got the permission slip. He's the one that had done 4 or 5 bulletins, right? And back then I joined all of the fan clubs, because with the bulletins, you got wrestling results and information from other territories that you had no other way to get. And also sometimes you got like the autographed picture of the star, whatever. And it's like $3-4 a year, right? So I've joined everything. I was a member of the Pedro Morales fan club. I'd never seen fucking Pedro Morales before, but I still got the fucking card and I got the picture and his autograph and everything. Anyway, so I joined Bob's fan club and I started sending in stuff from Louisville. And I guess even then I was a little anal because I would type the stuff up and I was taking pictures even then at the time. This is 1976, early, maybe late 75 I joined. And so anyway, after a number of bulletins, Mike got a hold of me and said, hey, he said, I can't remember what it was, but we were all teenage kids. He's like, something's come up and I can't really devote any more time to this. Would you like to take over the fan club? And I said, shit, well, I've never done this before, but this would give me a chance to write the bulletin because even then I was a frustrated magazine guy, writer guy, right? I want to write this stuff. So not write wrestling matches. Now, back then you wrote wrestling PR stuff, stories about wrestlers and interviews with wrestlers and everything. You didn't write wrestling matches. So anyway, I said, yeah, I'll do it. He said, good, I'll send you the whole club treasury, which turned out to be like $6, right? But I mean, we're teenagers. So then I start doing the bulletin with the next edition. And I must admit, I was not good on meeting deadlines, but boy, I was great it was an artistic masterpiece once you actually got it. The first one I did was just on the typewriter, right? Put the fucking blank paper in the typewriter, roll it through, type the stuff with the headlines, underline and everything, and leave an exact size space of white for the picture that you want to tape in there with double stick tape. Because then when you put it in the Xerox machine, it'll be black and white. We didn't have color copies in those days, but it looked halfway decent, right? After the first bulletin, I said, fuck, I ain't got enough room. I started doing it on legal size white paper, right? And I was still on the typewriter. And the one I did was like 24 pages of legal sized fucking, of course, it was just the one sheet of paper or one side of the paper. I couldn't do both sides or it'd fuck up the pictures, putting it through the typewriter. And then we've got to go downtown to find a fucking copy machine in those days that would copy legal size, blah, blah, blah. And it ended up costing me out of my pocket, actually out of my mom's pocket, I think probably at that point in time, $40 or $50. But I was loving doing these fucking bulletins. But finally, when I actually started shooting pictures, for real at the Gardens, I had to give it up because I was making money at that. And I didn't have time to do these mammoth phone book bulletins anymore. But so I had to give it up. But then Bob actually came into the territory about that time that I started taking pictures, and I got to meet him and take, fucking pictures of his matches and everything. So I lose the fan club, but I end up meeting Bob. And that was part of the thing that to me was so funny about Smoky Mountain Wrestling, because there were probably 2 or 3 members of the Bob Armstrong Club, at least at that time, it was 30 or 40 people or whatever. There was a couple members in Knoxville. So I'm just wondering if they ever made the connection that it was the same guy 20 years later almost that Bob was pile driving in the middle of the Knoxville Civic Coliseum, used to be his fan club president.
Was Hildebrand a member?
I don't think he was. No, he wasn't. Because we didn't meet until the Memphis WFIA convention in 1979. But, Brian was probably a member of the Dominic DiNucci fan club there. But it was Pittsburgh.
What are those bulletins like?
They were short. But anyway, but with Bob, so I'm his fan club president. Then I get to see him here. And of course, I had seen him he'd been to this territory previously. He had a nice run in 75. So I got to see his matches, including that match against the Stomper. And this match is on the DVD that accompanies Tuesday Night at the Gardens. I'm not trying to sell merchandise now, but it was a great match. But the last 2 or 3 minutes was one of the great 2 or 3 minutes in the history of wrestling to me, as far as performances in the ring. And it doesn't do it justice on, the transfer from the 16 millimeter film and the cameras back on the stands, but the fucking atmosphere, those people were going absolutely ballistic. And I was right. I was still a fan photographer sitting on the front row with my Instamatic, not up at the ring. But the atmosphere with the people, even on the front row that were jaded, they were into this. Blood was flying off these fucking guys. And I've told it before, but real briefly, they were having a normal match, which for Bullet Bob and the Mongolian Stomper was still good. But then fucking somehow Stomper plants Bullet Bob and he makes a big show of hitting the ropes. And I found out later on, while my attention was on that, Bullet Bob was working his magic. But Stomper hits the ropes and comes off with the big stomp with those boots right to Bob's head. And Bob immediately sat up and you saw blood shoot from his fucking head, right? And just run down his face. Fuck, right? To my 13-year-old fucking eyes, that looked pretty legitimate. And then the Stomper is kicking the shit out of Bob Armstrong and he's bleeding. I've never seen a human being bleed like this. And I'd been going to the matches now for a little over a year in Louisville. So this is some pretty good juice. And then, holy shit, when Bob makes his comeback, he fucking goes ballistic and then Stomper's fucking bleeding. And you didn't see the Stomper bleed a lot, right? And just the fight that they were having and the body language, especially that Bullet uses, and just the intensity, the people were going absolutely ape shit. And finally, they roll out on the apron. They get tangled up and Bob's just on top of him and they're windmilling each other. And they roll out on the apron and Bob is just right in front of me. And Bob is pickling that fucking bald-headed Stomper and Bob's bleeding like crazy. The picture is on the cover of Tuesday Night at the Gardens that I took. And the blood's flying and the people are screaming and the referee's counting count out, ding, ding, ding. And holy shit, the people are like, ah. That's what wrestling is at its heart, when you can get that much emotion from people because you are having a fight that they have lost all doubt that it is real. Not that this is a great performance or boy, isn't this really exciting. That was in that atmosphere was the essence of wrestling that I've felt a few times, but it was rare even in those days when the whole place had just bloody lost any doubt to what was going on was life and death, and they're into it. You could feel it. It was different. And so Bob was able to do that. He was cool. He talked the jive, but he was a Georgia boy. He had muscles, but he wasn't a bodybuilder. You know, he could work psychologically as well as athletically. He was a really complete package as a wrestler. And I tweeted this, as you know, congratulations, because somebody had tweeted, about congratulations, Bob, on your retirement match. And I said, he was the biggest star in a family of a great wrestling family, right? And somebody said, well, don't you think Road Dogg would be bigger? As well, actually, in terms of being seen worldwide and known in one company like the WWF, which is what the business pretty much became in that time period, yes, more people saw Road Dogg. But I think even Road Dogg would be the first one to say that for being a bigger star in his environment, in his day, Bob was always a main event guy and in search of the heavyweight title or holding it when he worked, whether it was Georgia or Florida or any of the 3 Tennessee territories or Continental. And, that's why he was in Pensacola. He's a legend there. He was always a main event guy, and he was a main event guy from the first time they started using him really in that spot, late 60s, early 70s, all the way through Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It was 20-something years he was a main event guy.
He's also the best person I've ever seen in wrestling in the commissioner role.
Well, yeah, and that's, that's where I wanted to go with that, because the reason why, and like I said, I was a fan of his matches in the 70s. I was fan club president. He was always, I got to work with him and Brad when they came in and worked for Crockett. A lot of people don't remember Midnight Express a couple times against Bob and Brad Armstrong. We didn't do any of the big shows where the tape is still, out there, but we had a number of house shows with them. When I first started Smoky Mountain Wrestling and when I was first conceiving it, there were several things I wanted to get. I wanted the I could have been crazy and said, well, I'll tell you what, how about me and my kids? I'm going to announce that I'm the boss here and I'm the booker and I'm running things and my kids are going to make all the wrestlers beg for their jobs and be subservient to us and be the evil empire. Or I could actually do it right. Who was going to be the boss, the promoter or the figurehead, the leader of the promotion? We had Sandy Scott, and obviously often we were referred to, promoter Sandy Scott on the air, and he's the one that dealt with the buildings and really, for a shoot, did promote the towns and dealt with the spot show sponsors. So we could talk about promoter Sandy Scott, and he had been a wrestling legend. The Scott brothers were huge in the 50s and 60s, and in the Carolinas where he settled, until he retired, 74-ish. He was a big in-ring star, but it had been a while. And also we were over in East Tennessee. So, and Sandy honestly was not the promo who is at Bullet Bob was. So while we would refer to Sandy Scott as the promoter, I always from the start wanted Bob as the commissioner for several reasons. Number one, my philosophy was I wanted the company to be the baby faces. Like every other wrestling promotion, territory promotion is since the dawn of time. The promoter of the territory plays it straight. If anything, he favors the baby faces because they're the ones that are in the right. And the heels get heat when they go over the top of or around or underneath or behind the back of the promotion and do these evil things. The heat goes on the heels. If the promoter is the heel, then as I've mentioned many times, why do the fans want to give the company their money? Or if it's all a fucking bullshit show, that's one thing, but this was not. So we wanted to make Smoky Mountain Wrestling the baby faces. Bob, when I first called him, was almost, I think, upset that I didn't want him to wrestle because it was like, what, you saying I'm too old? And then I explained to him what it would be. I wanted a fucking area legend who everybody had seen as a champion, as a tough guy, as an honest guy. Bob had a heel run down in Alabama. I don't think he ever did it in Knoxville, but it was long before, anyway. I wanted them to see him as the retired player coach, type of guy that is in charge of these wild Indian wrestlers that are just out of control. And he's the only man that can keep order in the wild Smoky Mountains. Bullet Bob Armstrong, the commissioner chosen by Smoky Mountain promoter Sandy Scott and the board of directors or whoever the fuck we never else ever named. That would make sure the company was looked at as the baby faces. And also because it's no secret, I was creating my own Bill Watts. Because to that point in time, the most successful, I'm not the biggest drawing things that we'd ever done in the business were involved with Crockett. But the most successful thing that I had ever done in my time in the wrestling business was the last Stampede series in Louisiana with Bill Watts coming out of retirement, the area legend who's taken an office position in the promotion, has been pushed too far by that weaselly manager, and he's got to get revenge. And that was to be my ace in the hole because I wanted, obviously, in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I wanted the wrestling to draw, and I wanted to be successful without utilizing myself or Bob Armstrong in the ring. But that was the ace up the sleeve that was designed from the first TV show that we ran when Bob was introduced as commissioner and I was introduced as the guy that was going to manage all the pricks. Because if we were doing well after a year and a half, and you couldn't do this right off, you couldn't just start on TV and 12 weeks later, well, here's Bob Armstrong back in the ring, because then it's bullshit and we'd have just wasted our shit. It had to be at least a year and a half. And then that would be the turbocharge. I wanted to be doing well anyway at that point, but then that would, boost us. So from the start, obviously the top heel manager loudmouth and the righteous, legitimate commissioner of the league are going to not be happy with each other, and we're going to snipe at each other. And there was always the verbal shit and a blah, blah, blah. And Bob would slide in every once in a while and make a 3 count or be a special referee, or things would happen. But so we never got physical, and he never returned to the ring. He was the commissioner, and he was not allowed to wrestle as a result of that. And as I've mentioned before, also, we started doing pretty well in our spot shows right off the bat. And we started doing pretty well in Johnson City and Freedom Hall because we had strong TV on WCYB there. And, and it was a town that had been dark for longer and was kind of ready to see things come back. But Knoxville was the hard one. It had been 3 years since Continental went under, and last year of Continental was not a stellar year for wrestling. And then people had the glut of wrestling on television with WWF and WCW and the syndication and the cable. And then WCW had been going to Knoxville and still drawing big houses in the Coliseum. That's why I got the idea to center there to begin with. But then they had started no-showing them, and they'd started hurting their business. So by 1992, when we go into Knoxville, those people have seen great wrestling over the years. They're hard to please. The town got killed about 12 years beforehand by the Knoxville Five and then brought back, and now we got to bring it back again. So Knoxville was the slow one, but we knew that they were out there. And as I've said before, I couldn't do anything. I think like Christmas time when we had special ticket prices, we could get over 1,000 people. But while we would our first year, we had almost 1,000 people at the high school football field in Saltville, Virginia, for a spot show with us against the Fantastics, and Bobby Fulton promoted it along with the Saltville Booster Club himself, and we were drawing more people at high school football fields in small towns than we were in Knoxville yet. And I really wanted to, to wait as long as I could, but I said, all right. That following spring, when we did the second volunteer slam and did the Rage in the Cage, I said, this is where we're going to pull the trigger on the angle with Bob. And that's what I had told him from the start. I'd explained to him that I didn't want to just have him come in and wrestle. Because, yes, his name would have meant something on the cards. He's a legend, and people would have paid to go see him. But then he would have been one of the boys from the start. And then, even though he could obviously do angles and cut promos, you couldn't position his arrival as something special, especially after you'd had a year to establish a bigger TV audience and get more eyeballs on your product, right? And plus the story that we were trying to tell necessitated that he start as the commissioner and be pushed to the breaking point. So anyway, with all that said, that's why we did what we did. And we came to May of 93 in Knoxville, where we did the Volunteer Slam Rage in a Cage, the Heavenly Bodies, Kevin Sullivan, Killer Kyle, and the Tasmaniac. Taz, who's the trivia question. Did Taz ever wrestle in SMW or in Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Against the Rock and Roll Express, Robert Fuller, Jimmy Golden, and Brian Lee. And Fuller and Golden were nominally baby faces in this situation because we'd had an issue with the Heavenly Bodies and the Stud Stable. This was really to go and make our summertime needed to be different. We had run the Bodies in the Rock and Roll Express for almost 6 months. We had changed members of the Bodies and put Jimmy Del Rey in when Stan retired. And we couldn't do it forever. So I wanted to go in a different direction with the Rock and Roll and the Bodies, even though keeping them in the territory. So we did the Rage in the Cage match. Bullet Bob was the referee. That's where we finally, at the end of it, when the baby faces went over, but Fuller and Golden switched back heel and gave us the key. We keep the baby faces immobilized. We crucify Bob in the cage, and I beat him to death with the racket, and it separated his sternum, and we had him carted out on an ambulance or on a stretcher to an ambulance. For that big show, we still only did 1,085 people paid. And at our ticket price at the time, $7,338, because ticket prices were $8 ringside, $6 general admission, and $5 for kids under 12, because we picked up with the Continental prices. And we raised them later on when we got doing better business to 10, 8, and 6, by God. Anyway, it's all right. We did 1,000 people in May. Now, June, which along with September was always, for whatever reason, the worst month in the calendar year for Knoxville, I brought in my mystery team to face the Rock and Roll Express, which turned out to be Ron and Don Harris, the Bruise Brothers. And they were a different kind of team for the Rock and Roll to work with. And they were, big, and you could get sympathy on Ricky. They looked fantastic, and they really could move and work in those days. And for the Heavenly Bodies, obviously, Scott and Steve Armstrong would come in to try to get revenge for Bullet Bob. So that was the two main events, basically. And then Tracy and the Dirty White Boy for the Smoky Mountain title. The three main events. And it sucked. With the comps for the sponsors, we did 936 people, but money-wise, we did $4,315. But this is where I learned that while they were with the story, Scott and Steve were brand new. I mean, they knew who Scott and Steve Armstrong were, but they hadn't been in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Scott had been Dixie Dynamite. We did the deal where he took the mask off voluntarily because I outed him as being Bob Armstrong's son, and I told the people that he was ashamed of it, and that's why he hid his face. And he did a great emotional interview.
Best interview of his career, yeah.
Yeah, it was the best interview he ever did. But that's like 2 weeks before this shit, right? And all this, they're just starting to get involved. So the bodies and the Armstrongs, it was important for the sake of the story because I had a goal in mind, which was August. So we bite the bullet. We do Hooters night in June. At the rent deal that we had, we lost probably a couple grand that night. I was maybe even $3,500 maybe. Because remember, wrestling economics were different back then. But in July, because the bodies went over, cheated and won, in July, Bullet Bob was ready to get back in the ring. He had overcome his injuries. He'd been sending in training videos, sending in videos about how his doctor was about to clear him, etc. So now, if I didn't have any patience, I would have immediately booked Bullet Bob Armstrong versus Jim Cornette, but instead, 6-man tag. Bullet Bob, Scott, and Steve against the Heavenly Bodies and Jim Cornette. And this way, Bob's going to swear to get revenge, but it's a family affair. And now, all of a sudden, we're back over 1,000 people. We had, hold on here. Well, we had 200 more paid, and we're up about $2,500 somehow, how that mathematics worked. Rock and Roll came back in a no time limit, no disqualification tag title match with the Bruise Brothers. And now Brian Lee has turned on Tracy Smothers, and he's after the bounty placed on Tracy, and Brian's got Tammy in his corner. So I'm changing the talent around a bit and changed the programs, and we came up. But the finish of this 6-man is the reason why the 6-man needed to be, because we milk all through the match. I might get a shot in every once in a while at somebody, but Bullet Bob's not going to get his hands on me. Bullet Bob's not going to get his hands on me until finally the whole thing breaks down at the end, and there's 6 of us. That means 3 and 3, and guess who I end up with? Bullet Bob Armstrong, and he is about to fucking rip me limb from limb. And I can't remember exactly how we did it, but I believe he's got me in the corner, and I think he's knocked me fucking goofy. But Tom Pritchard comes behind Bob with the racket, hits him in the back of the head, knocks him cold. Bob falls down, and I fall unconscious on top of Bob Armstrong. And the referee turns around. It's the only match I ever won in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Actually, I don't know. It might be the only match I ever won as a manager. I beat Bullet Bob Armstrong in the middle of the Knoxville Civic Coliseum 1, 2, 3. And the people are fucking bullshit, right? What the fuck? And Bob's bullshit. And that was the key. That's when he could come out on TV and say, ladies and gentlemen, I've been a professional wrestler for over 25 years. I've given it my life. I'm proud of my profession, and I have never been so ashamed and so embarrassed and so humiliated as to what that and whatever he'd say about me. No good. Jim Cornette did. That he embarrassed me. It wasn't about that. We heard him before, but now this is even worse. He's been embarrassed, and he's been pushed to the breaking point. He's already resigned as commissioner to get back in the ring, and now he is saying basically that if he gets his match with Jim Cornette at the K-Town Showdown in August, 1-on-1, the match he wants, that not only if he doesn't beat me and send me to the same hospital in the same ambulance that I sent him in May, that he will not only refund the money of every man, woman, and child that buys a ticket to see the match, but he'll retire from wrestling and burn his boots in the middle of the ring, right? Okay, now, and once again, I researched this idea from Memphis because years earlier they had done the deal, but they'd done it in reverse. It was Austin Idol and Jerry Lawler in the hair match, the famous hair match. And everybody in Memphis knew one thing: Jerry Lawler's never going to lose his hair. Whether we believe wrestling or not, it's never going to happen. And it was going to happen, kind of. So they, to juice it up, had Austin Idol come out with a fucking briefcase full of cash and say, if I don't shave Jerry Lawler's head, then I will refund everybody's money, and I've got the money to do it, darling. And so everybody said, okay, well, wait a minute. We're going to see the show for free, apparently, because they actually believed they would get their money back more than Lawler would get the head shaved, I think. But one way or another, they were either going to see Lawler get his hair cut or see the show for free. That was the selling point. With me, the selling point was I wanted them to know that they were going to see me go to the hospital, because I thought that actually meant more. They might not even believe we'd give the money back or whatever, but even if it did at those ticket prices, folks, I think they wanted to know that they were for sure not going to get screwed out of this. They were going to see me go to the fucking hospital. And so that's the stipulation we did. And we did the promos to build it up and et cetera. And once again, except for that Christmas time, with our cheap prices, I think we'd had 1,200 or 1,300 in Knoxville, and we'd had about 1,000 for the volunteer slam, whatever the fuck. We come back in August, as I've mentioned many times before. Bullet Bob versus Jim Cornette, anything goes, and the Lumberjacks. All of his sons in the rock and roll and all of the guys that I managed were around the ring with tennis rackets, so there had to be a winner. Nobody could get away. Tracy Smothers and Brian Lee in a coal miner's glove match for the title. And then a 4-team elimination match with the Bodies and the Bruise Brothers against the Armstrongs and the Rock and Roll. We did 2,400 paid with 300 and something comps through our sponsor, Spectrum Rents and et cetera. So 2,700 in the building and $18,000. We more than doubled our previous people record, and pretty much about doubled our gate record as well in Knoxville. And that's really, and also that night, by the way, there was a concert with the Armstrong Family Rhythm and Blues Musical Review and the Clintons. Brian got up and sang. Steve sang. I think Tracy Smothers sang Uneasy Rider. Almost all the words, too. It was amazing. That kicked us off in Knoxville. If we hadn't done that show, I don't know if we would have got them. But once we got those people, then, of course, in September, I had to change things completely. I brought Terry Funk in to get even for me, because I had been to the hospital. And September was the other bad month, and that we were back down well below 1,000 people for Terry Funk and Bullet Bob. But that was the beginning of the program. I learned 2 things from Southern wrestling: personal issues draw money, and your blow-off crowd will be better than your first crowd. There was no dream match in those days. These guys have never wrestled before. And that'd be the big house. If 2 guys had never wrestled before, unless it was for the world title, or they did a big angle on television, nobody gave a shit. It was the first match, what you did in the finish, or what you did in the first angle, and what you did in the matches leading to your blow-off that built things. So, yes, in August, Bob got juice on me, beat me bloody, gave me 2 pile drivers. We called the ambulance. I've told that story. It was a fucking rib. Took forever. They taped me that backboard I was on for 5 hours, carried me out in the fucking ambulance. The people loved it. One of them followed me into the fucking x-ray room at the hospital to make sure they were really x-raying me while I was taped to the backboard. And Hildebrand drove me home, etc. So now I had to get even. So I went away. That's when I wore the neck brace at SummerSlam 93, by the way. That was 10 days afterwards. I'd been pile driven. I told Vince, I got to wear a neck brace. Okay, pal. On Regis and Kathy Lee, too. Okay. But anyway, so the next month, I come back with Terry Funk to get even against Bob Armstrong. Well, nobody wants to see anybody get even against Bob Armstrong, so it didn't draw, but we did the original finish where we get some fucking heat, and then Terry keeps coming and making appearances and working with the kids and working with opposite Bullet Bob in a variety of ways. And by the following February 13th, when we did Sunday Bloody Sunday, Terry Funk and Bullet Bob in the Texas Death Match was one of the most heavily pushed match, one of the featured matches. And that's the day that we did over 3,000 people, and what was the guy? 4,000 people and $33,000 at the gate. Same main event, but the difference was the story we told along the way. And Knoxville since August September went down, but then October was a little better. Then Christmas or Thanksgiving and Christmas was really good that year. Then we come back and do that record Sunday Bloody Sunday crowd. And that was the year that we ended up doing Night of Legends and blew that record away. So really that first night when we did the angle with Bob and paid it off in August of 93, probably made a difference in us being able to run Knoxville going forward or not, because we weren't getting any traction. But once they came, they might not all come back every time, but every time we do a really good show or have an interesting concept or a theme or whatever, or definitely the big shows in the summertime, they would come, and they came better. And that saved us in Knoxville. So, but I mean, we did a lot of these matches in all the towns and spot shows. And Bob was up there in Hayside, Virginia, just as often as he was in the Coliseum in Knoxville. He was integral, as much as the rock and roll, as much as the bodies, actually maybe more than anybody else in Smoky Mountain succeeding as long as it did, and having those landmark events, because he not only made the promotion credible with the fans, but then he was able to step in and draw the money where we needed it to keep things going. And that's why he was, and it didn't get old. He was figured into pretty much everything we ever did until we closed, and people still saw it in the proper way. I mean, we didn't make him a regular wrestler, but he would go back to being commissioner. Then he could come back if necessary, and get in the ring or do something, or, make a difference in some kind of way, and at the same time, he didn't have to come up every weekend and do everything. So it was more special when Bob Armstrong was around.
I was at many house shows for Smoky Mountain when, after he had already been allowed to be Bob Armstrong again, he still wore the bullet mask. Why?
He liked it. No, he liked it. And also there was, I think we had at some point had done something where, well, Bob Armstrong can't wrestle, but the Bullet can, or whatever the fuck, right? But actually, he had started wearing the mask when he had the accident, the weightlifting accident, which I don't know if everybody remembers now or not, but this was like, good God, was it 81-ish, 2-ish, 82, 83? It was during the period of a couple years right before Georgia became part of Crockett's, domain. He was working out in the gym with doing heavy benches, and somehow I'm not a weightlifter, but the gimmick wasn't secured, and the fucking plate fell off, and the bar fell with all that weight and landed on his head and rolled down his face, and just crushed a variety of his facial bones and his nose, and it was really a bad deal. And I mean, could have been worse. And after all of this, he had surgeries and various things went on. And if you will go back and notice, Bob Armstrong's nose was almost like a hawk nose almost in the 70s compared to what his nose was after they got it fixed. It flattened out a lot of his features, and he started wearing the mask when he had just had that thing, and it got over. He'd always been nicknamed Bullet Bob, but the Bullet, that got over, and he liked working in it. And you could do things with it. Once again, when I brought Murdoch in, it was like, we're going to take fucking that mask off, and we're going to prove it's Bob Armstrong, right? And he beats the Bullet. I believe it was in Knoxville on Thanksgiving night, and we both sit down in the chairs to see him have to take this mask off and be banished, and I'm rid of Bob Armstrong forever. And it's the two mask thing. He takes the fucking mask off, and there's another mask underneath it. He's fulfilled the stipulation. We fall over backwards in the chairs. The people scream, yay, yay. They didn't want to see him unmasked because he'd have to leave. Now the people, well, you fucked us on the finish. You didn't take your mask off. That's the whole thing. The people say, he fucked him again. And we put it over big. You could do so many things with that. So I think it was a combination of all those things. You could do things with it. He liked it. He had gotten used to it. And the people loved it.
most kids wouldn't want their parents around when they go to work, especially in a business like wrestling. But from everything I know, his kids loved having him around. Is that everything you saw?
Oh, God. Well, as a matter of fact, I think I probably could have got the boys to take a cut and pay when I would have on the trips that Bob would make, right? They enjoyed it. Yeah, they did the family stuff. They'd go over to Bouncing Beulah's for Sunday afternoon meal all together. They would stay together. They'd ride together. You know, it was a family deal. And I that's the one thing I wanted to do that was going to be Christmas 95 that I never got to do. I had each member of the family work for me individually or as teams or whatever, but I never had all 5 on the same card at the same time in the same match. And that was going to be my Christmas, called the Homecoming. All 5 members of the Armstrong family against all the heels. And we didn't make it that far. But Brad that's the thing. I only got Brad like springish of 95 that year, and had gotten him established as being in the title picture, but it didn't have time to put the whole thing together. But there you have it. But yeah, so after all this time, he has his final match. Supposedly.
What was his first match?
Here's the thing. They said 59 years in wrestling on the tweet that the family put out. And see, here's the thing. A lot of people don't remember that he was already, and that's when Bob stayed in Atlanta with the promotional split, when everybody else went with Gunkel. And they rewarded him that's where he got in really good with the other NWA promoters, because Eddie Graham was sending guys in from Florida. And they see Bob Armstrong, and they're like, wow. And Bob Armstrong goes to Florida. And Jerry Jarrett's sending guys in from Tennessee, and they see Bob Armstrong. Wow. Right. And he's going to Tennessee. So he really got expanded his environment by actually not going with the other side in the promotional war in 74. But he had been wrestling, and I've got programs where he was on top in at least the Georgia territory in the late 60s. And he wrestled part-time when he first got started, because he was that's why they called him the fighting fireman. Not only had he been in the Marines, but he was a firefighter in Cobb County in Marietta. So he was already in his 30s when he started traveling to the other territories and started making a name there. But he had been wrestling in Georgia since sometime in the early 60s. Maybe 1960 was his first match. I don't know, when he maybe first broke in on an indie show. But, he had, yeah. And once again, a guy who steadily was a main event guy in a territory and never really left the Southeast for 25 years. Because think about it. He never worked Texas. He never worked fucking the AWA. He never worked the WWF. He didn't go to Crockett. Did he ever work the Carolinas? I don't think he went to Crockett till 86. So, basically all 3 of the Tennessee territories, Georgia, Florida, Alabama and its various incarnations. And he would just go from one to another. That's why I'm pretty sure Bullet Bob's kind of guy. I know he still lives in the same house he did when he was working for me down in the Pensacola area. I'm pretty sure he'd probably lived there for 20 years before that. He made good, steady money in the wrestling business, being a top guy all around the Southeast for fucking parts of 4 different decades.
Plus, he owned a piece of the Pensacola promotion with Ron Fuller.
Well, yes, and he was always in, either in the office or, booking or helping in some respects. So that's back when you could make a real good living doing that.
And, we've talked so much about him as a babyface. It didn't get a lot of attention, and it still kind of doesn't, because Southeastern has been largely forgotten over the last number of years, although more people are paying attention to it now. But when he turned heel during the Ron Fuller versus Ric Flair match, the people went apeshit. And you talk to anyone who was there, it lit the territory up, seeing babyface Ron Fuller against, for the first time ever, heel Bob Armstrong, would come on TV smoking cigarettes, talking about his mistress, slapping his son Brad. I mean, amazing stuff. Grew a mustache.
Yeah. And, that's the thing is that when you had established yourself in those days as something, whether it was a perpetual heel or a perpetual babyface, and then you switched, it worked. I was always taught when I first got into business by Dennis Condrey and then by Dundee, by, all the people who knew what they were doing. If you are not over as a babyface and you switch heel, you won't be over either, unless they're just starting you from scratch in a brand new push. Or vice versa. If you're not over as a heel and you switch babyface, nobody gives a shit either. But if you're over as a heel and you switch babyface, you'll be really over. And if you're over as a babyface and you switch heel, you'll be really over. It's for a top guy who maybe get on just the edge of getting stale, or has a new guy comes in that they're perfect to work with if he switches his spot or whatever. And you would do those turns because it wasn't national TV. So you only saw those people. Bob Armstrong only turned once in his career. He'd been established as a babyface for so many years. That's why it was such a huge shock. But for people in the territories, if you only switched once in that territory, people thought you had only switched once. They didn't know you'd done it in fucking Vancouver or whatever. So if you had somebody that was established as a top babyface and you switched them heel, that's once again, Ed Lawler, as I just mentioned earlier in the program, he had literally been the top babyface in the territory 2 months before he had fucking people hitting the ring on him trying to beat the shit out of him. But if you weren't over in your spot, switching you wouldn't help unless you're just starting all over and starting from scratch. And that's another thing we've lost, because now the problem is if you switch too many times, and obviously it doesn't work. It's like coming out of retirement too many times or doing anything too many times. So now when people see a perpetual babyface switch heel or vice versa, that's great. But then that guy, unless he just goes completely away from wrestling, he's going to be on a TV program that's somewhat nationally seen. They're going to see it every other time too now. So that's another thing that we've overexposure in terms of everybody in the world being able to see everything. That's something else that's been taken away. You can't switch anybody more than a few times over a long period of time or it becomes meaningless. Such as all the people now do people even turn on anybody anymore? Do they switch heel or babyface? Can you tell?
They switch, but you don't know what they're switching to.
And you don't know why, and you don't know what it's all about.
Right. I think the big show is like someone did a tally, and it was something like 30 turns from babyface to heel.
One of the best, when Dutch Mantell was a heel and switched to babyface in 81, and he got over from that run 81 to 85, 6-ish. He was Lawler and Dundee and Valiant level, which he was one of the only guys to really do that for any long period of time. But he was figured in as a heel, but he wasn't a top single heel. He'd always been in a tag team. And then suddenly, Fuchi and Onita came in. They were with Tojo. And they did the deal where they had desecrated the flag and they'd beat up, I think Dream Machine had an American flag or whatever, and they'd beat up him and Dundee, but I can't remember exactly how that happened. But Dutch Mantell comes out and wipes the mat with Tojo and Fuchi and Onita and then talks about what the American flag meant to him and how and I'll never forget, I know how long Dutch Mantell, I don't know how long I was in Chicago 2 weeks ago, seemed like 3 months. But I know how long Dutch Mantell was in Vietnam, 11 months and 27 days, because he cut the promo. And when you desecrate that American flag, and of course they're Japanese anyway, but close enough to Vietnam, right? For those days, it's 1981. That was his promo. I laid in that rat-infested jungle for 11 months and 27 days, Tojo Yamamoto, to not see that flag laying on the ground. And you guys, and he did the patriotic thing, and boom. And from that point, he could be Dutch was the only guy that ever worked in Tennessee as a tweener. He could work a program with Lawler when they were both baby faces, and it drew, and it didn't kill him, and people didn't even really turn on him. And he could also be a heel, but then he'd come back a few years later and switch back to be a baby face. He was always over from that point on. And he established, because it was natural for Dutch. His image with people was, I don't really trust anybody, and really, if there's money on the line, in the end, I will try to take it. I won't fucking like pay people to do my dirty work for me. I'm not a gutless coward, but if there's a sucker like Jim Cornette when I managed him for a week that needs to be parted from his money, I'll fucking deal with him. And he could fight anybody, and it worked for him. It wouldn't work for everybody. But like you said, with Bob Armstrong's heel turn, or with great turns, those were some of the fucking when Zbyszko turned on Bruno. led to the biggest run of business that the WWF ever did. They were turning them away from the Spectrum and from the Baltimore Civic Center, and they couldn't even go to the Garden for the blow-off that year. They had to go to Shea Stadium and did 35,000 people. What was that, August 9, 1980?
Yeah.
Zbyszko quit because they only gave him $22,000 for the payoff for that night. I think Bruno got 29. What's 29 grand today from 1980? A lot of fucking money for a house show. But that was because they built the story. They knew Zbyszko was his protege. It had been years. Zbyszko was the guy the heels always used to hurt to get to Bruno. And then finally the kid comes out and fucking turns on his mentor and hits Bruno with the chair. Did he get juice? Whatever the fuck. And from then they had to move Zbyszko out of the territory. Once they got the fucking returns with Bruno, they were afraid somebody was going to kill him, and they fucking shipped him out. But those turns were the biggest business catalysts in the old days in wrestling. The World Championship and a top guy turning on somebody else. Those were the two strongest things you could do.
Well, how about when Bruno Sammartino had that good friend, the friendly cowboy, Bill Watts, and all of a sudden he turns on him in a tag team match, and they lit up Madison Square Garden.
Well, didn't they sell out three? This was what, was it 64?
64, 65.
Or 65.
65, yeah.
3 sellouts of Madison Square Garden in a row, and that's when Watts had. And see, that's Watts. I find that there's parallels. Watts learned some of the same lessons I learned, which makes it fucking coincidental because I learned a lot of them from him. There he is 2 or 3 years in the business, and he's selling out Madison Square Garden with Bruno Sammartino because he was a babyface that fucking turned on the top guy. And then that's how they made another star. Well, what'd you talk about earlier in the program? Junkyard Dog is the top guy, babyface in the territory, and another babyface turns on him and becomes the top heel, Ted DiBiase. And then later on, Watts comes out of retirement, blah, 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 and then I learn, but it's not that you steal shit in wrestling, but it's not that you steal it exactly. You take the concepts and the ideas and you tailor them to the personalities. And you don't just do, I'm going to have an angle where one of my baby faces turns on his partner and do it like that. You wait until conditions are right. And then when you're saying, boy, what if so-and-so turned on so-and-so, then we could do this and that. And then you realize that it works in this environment. With just the way that this is developed, this works. And recognizing when to do those things is the biggest art of booking.
With the DiBiase turn, it was really interesting because they kind of set it up in the weeks before that episode, but until it happens, you really wouldn't know that that's what they're setting up. But he screwed the Junkyard Dog out of the Louisiana State title in the tournament after he had to give up the title for the match where DiBiase screwed him.
Yeah.
So that may have been when all the heat happened, because the interesting thing about the match where DiBiase turns on the Dog is they're two best friends. The Dog was the best man at DiBiase's wedding. They're having a back and forth match, fair. And every time the Dog gets up, usually he has the advantage, they touch hands. They're still cool. Yeah. Finally, DiBiase loads the glove and hits him. The fans don't know how to react. They're sitting there. They're upset, but they're not booing. They're not screaming. They're not standing up. They're in shock. Like, they're so trained to see DiBiase one way, and as the Dog's friend, they can't believe what they just saw. So the heat doesn't even begin yet. Yeah,
it's kind of like, did he? Well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we didn't see it right. Certainly he did.
Yeah.
And then it settles in, and then you build it. Yes. And a lot of times, it's called planting seeds. We're going to plant a seed. We're going to say something that doesn't really make any sense now, but it will make sense in a month when the turn has happened, and then you can go back and refer to it or even play the tape. Or plant a seed with something that happened in a match, a time or two, and that's going to lead to, well, you fucked that up the first time, but the second time, fuck you, or whatever. That's the way that if a booker had in mind the way that he wanted to go and how he wanted to accomplish this, he would plant little seeds that the people wouldn't get at the time, but they would understand when the whole thing happened. And then it would make sense. And it would give in the fan's mind a reasoning for this guy to have turned on his friend or to be jealous or to be mad or upset or he's found out whatever. You know, and it wasn't this long drawn out fucking sob story or overly written and scripted, you know, backstory. It was just the simple stuff. You know, well, fuck, I kind of got fucked out of the title and now you've got it. So really it's my title and I'm jealous and we're going to find this out when I finally fucking bombard you over the head with this chair. And, you know, but that worked. If you contrive all this fucking hokey bullshit backstory that's so complicated nobody can believe it, you know, then you've shit the bed.
You know,
anyway,
we've talked about baby faces turning heel and the heat that causes. But before we go, Jim, I was thinking about Nikita while we were talking, even though that's the other way. That's a heel turning baby face by aligning himself with the very popular baby face. Do you have a favorite heel to baby face turn?
Oh, God. One of the first ones I ever saw, to be honest, that really registered with me, that surprised me, was Phil Hickerson. Because he turned on Barnes and Dundee. George Barnes and Bill Dundee were kicking the shit out of, I can't remember who, but somebody in one of the baby faces. And a couple of job guys had run out. It was a studio television program, so everybody knew that there wasn't like 40 wrestlers there. And there had been a contrived story somewhere or another that besides those two job guys, and there wasn't anybody else to come help poor whoever the fuck, and here comes Phil Hickerson. And I remember it because of the bumps that Barnes and Dundee took, because they were goddamn acrobats at that point. I mean, Phil Hickerson hits the ring, fucking broad arm on George Barnes to the chest. He backflips and lands on his fucking face, and it didn't look hokey. And he fucking nails Dundee, and Dundee takes a big bump. Then he shoots fucking Barnes off corner to corner, and Barnes takes his forward over the top turnbuckle and out in the fucking floor bump. And then he shoots Dundee off the other way, and Dundee goes upside down, and fucking, it was just goddamn, he cleared the fucking ring, and had pretty good fucking movement to it, and it was unexpected. Phil Hickerson's always been a fucking heel, you know, for the whole year and a half I've been watching him. So that as a fan really registered on me. Of course, I loved, you know, almost any of Handsome Jimmy's turns. He did them so much. And Jimmy Valiant is one guy, he could turn back and forth because he was the other guy. You know, that was part of his appeal, is that he's fucking nuts. Right? As long as he's on our side, we'll take him. Handsome Jimmy's great, but they still he became kind of a cool heel after the first run with Lawler, when he was just a straight heel and they were breaking bottles over each other's head and doing all the blood shit. But then later on, after he'd been a babyface for a while, because the people really turned him the first time and they just went with it. Whenever he turned back and forth, the people just go, that's Handsome Jimmy, you know. He fucking Coco Ware wins the TV title on television, and the award is actually a fucking television, and fucking Jimmy comes out and grabs it and throws the TV down and breaks it and then beats the shit out of Coco just to turn heel. It's fucking, and then another time he slapped Tommy Rich's mother, Peggy Rich, called her Miss Piggy, slapped her.
The worst part about that, though, isn't even him. It's the fact that little Tojo's there as his backup. So he's yelling at Miss Gilbert, and Tojo's like the muscle to intimidate her.
Well, but we've seen from that Tupelo concession stand brawl with Onita and Fucci, Tojo slapped old fucking, what was it, Tupelo promoter? What was his name? Oh, God damn it. Now he scared his name out. His wife, it was running the concession stand.
Not Henry Rogers.
No, that was Malden, Missouri. Tupelo was, oh, fuck. I would know it any other time. Randy Hales is out there screaming the guy's name to me. But anyway, nevertheless, yeah, Tojo had a checkered past with slapping women in the face.
That seems like a great time to end this week's show.
Yeah, it is. All right, I'm going to Chicago this weekend. Next week, we're going to be back with more of this stuff. If anything happens in the world of wrestling, we will talk about it. I'll tell you what happened in Chicago. We'll see if Trump strokes out and his fucking shit for brains melts out his ass in between now and next week, so we can all bake a cake and have a party. And Brian can think of some more questions. And until then, for everybody, thank you, fuck you, bye-bye, everybody.